It started like any other morning. The birds chirped lazily in the old oak tree by the porch, and the morning sun cast a warm, golden glow across my front yard. I had just finished my morning tea, leaning back in my wooden rocking chair, watching the dew evaporate from the freshly mowed grass. The sweet scent of lavender and jasmine from my small garden drifted through the air, a comforting reminder of the countless hours I'd spent nurturing those blooms. I cherished these quiet moments, simple, unpretentious, but profoundly fulfilling. That peace, however, shattered like a dropped glass the moment I heard the first loud, impatient knock on my front door. I opened it to find Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. She stood there, arms crossed, lips pursed in a thin, disapproving line, her sharp blue eyes slicing through the morning calm like a blade. She wore her usual pastel cardigan, pearls gleaming around her neck, and a look on her face that suggested she had just discovered a stain on her favorite rug. "Morning," I greeted, my voice calm but curious. Karen had never graced my doorstep before, not once in the 5 years since I moved into this quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. "Is this yours?" she snapped, holding up a printed piece of paper, her French manicured fingers trembling slightly. It was a copy of the HOA guidelines, thick, small font text that looked as dry as the Arizona desert. I glanced at the paper, then back at her. "What's this about, Karen?" She took a deep breath, clearly irritated that I hadn't immediately bent to her will. "This," she said, jabbing the paper towards my face, "is a list of rules that everyone in this community is expected to follow. And you, miss, what's your name again?" "Oh, right. Emily. You've been blatantly ignoring them." I raised an eyebrow, surprised but not yet alarmed. "Ignoring them? How so?" Karen's eyes flicked to my front yard, taking in the well-kept flower beds, the neatly trimmed hedges, the small, handcrafted wooden fence that separated my property from the sidewalk. I'd built it myself last spring, a project I had poured my heart and sweat into. It wasn't just a fence, it was a symbol of my hard work, my perseverance, my pride in my home. "This," she hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at the fence, "is an eyesore. It's unapproved. You didn't submit the proper forms, and it's encroaching on HOA property." I felt my chest tighten, a slow, simmering anger starting to build beneath my calm exterior. I knew my rights. I had measured the boundary lines myself. This fence was on my property, my land, my space. I had the survey papers to prove it, neatly filed away in a drawer inside. I took a slow, calming breath. "Karen," I said, meeting her glare head-on, "that fence is on my property. I double-checked the boundary lines before building it. I even had a professional surveyor come out to confirm it. It's not on HOA land." She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my firm response, but quickly regained her composure. "Well," she sniffed, adjusting her pearl necklace, "I'll need to see those papers, and until then, you'll need to take it down. I won't have this neighborhood looking like a farmer's field." I bit back a sharp retort, my mind flashing to the long nights I had spent building that fence, hammering each nail, sanding each plank, staining the wood until it gleamed warmly in the sun. This wasn't just a fence to me. It was a piece of my soul, a testament to my grit, my resilience. And I wasn't about to let some nosy, power-hungry HOA president trample all over it. "I'll get the papers," I replied, my voice steady, my eyes locked on hers. "But I'm not taking it down." Karen's nostrils flared slightly, her eyes narrowing. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone she likely viewed as just another simple woman in her pristine, cookie-cutter neighborhood. "Very well," she spat, turning on her heel. "But don't say I didn't warn you. The HOA will be hearing about this." With that, she stalked back down my front steps, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path, each step radiating indignation. I watched her retreat, my fists clenched, jaw tight. I knew this was just the beginning. I had seen the way she treated other neighbors, the subtle intimidation, the veiled threats, the smug assumption of authority. But she had no idea who she was dealing with this time. I wasn't just some pushover, some quiet, timid homeowner who would fold at the first hint of confrontation. I had fought bigger battles than this. I had faced tougher opponents, both in the boardroom and in life. And if Karen wanted a fight over my front yard, she was about to get one. As her pastel silhouette disappeared down the street, A fierce determination flared within me. This wasn't just about a fence. This was about standing up for myself, for my home, for my right to live my life without being trampled by someone else's petty power games. I turned back to my yard, the morning sun now casting long, defiant shadows across the grass. I smiled, a slow, fierce smile that promised Karen she had just picked a battle she was destined to lose. After Karen's sharp exit from my front porch, I wasted no time. I marched back inside, the old wooden door creaking behind me as I headed straight for the small, weathered oak desk in my study. I yanked open the bottom drawer, shuffling through stacks of neatly organized files until my fingers found the thick manila folder labeled Property Survey, 2023. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the precise black ink of the surveyor's report. The boundary lines were crystal clear, my fence was well within the limits of my property, even giving a cautious half-foot buffer just to avoid exactly this kind of conflict. I smiled, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. Karen had picked the wrong house to harass. But I knew this wasn't just about a fence. Karen's outburst this morning hinted at something more, a deeper, more personal vendetta. She had never bothered me before, never even acknowledged my presence at HOA meetings or the occasional neighborhood event. She seemed content to ignore me, a quiet, unassuming figure who rarely ventured beyond the shadow of my own front porch. So why now? What had changed? I found my answer the very next day. It started with a rustle outside my kitchen window, the sound of leaves crunching under hurried footsteps. I peeked through the curtains, expecting to see a stray cat or maybe one of the neighborhood kids cutting through my garden. Instead, I saw Karen, clipboard in hand, walking along the edge of my yard, eyes narrowed as she scribbled furiously. I felt my blood pressure rise. She was inspecting my property like a hawk, her sharp eyes darting from the carefully trimmed hedges to the small, hand-painted birdhouse hanging from the low branches of my magnolia tree. She paused at the fence, prodding one of the sturdy posts with her heel as if expecting it to crumble at her touch. I watched, silently seething, as she slowly circled my lawn, jotting down notes like a detective building a case. It wasn't just invasive, it was downright unsettling. Deciding I had seen enough, I yanked open the front door, the sound of rusty hinges cutting through the morning air. "Morning, Karen," I called, my voice carrying a sharp edge I didn't bother to hide. "Can I help you with something?" She straightened immediately, the same startled look flickering across her face that I had seen the day before when I first pushed back. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of something behind her icy blue eyes, a flash of uncertainty, maybe even fear, before her mask of steely control snapped back into place. "Just performing a routine inspection," she replied, her tone saccharine and dripping with forced politeness. "We have to ensure the neighborhood maintains a certain standard." "Routine," I echoed, stepping onto the porch and crossing my arms over my chest. "Funny, I don't recall seeing you inspect anyone else's yard this morning, or any other morning, for that matter." She flinched, her cheeks flushing a shade darker. "The HOA has received several complaints," she snapped, flipping through the pages on her clipboard without looking up. "It's my duty to follow up on them." I took a slow, deliberate step closer, my boots crunching on the gravel path. "Complaints? About my yard?" I let out a dry chuckle. "From who exactly?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. I could see the wheels turning behind those hard eyes, searching for a plausible excuse. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that," she finally replied, her voice tight. "But rest assured, the HOA takes these matters very seriously." I felt a bitter, angry laugh rise in my throat, but swallowed it down. I knew exactly what this was, a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate me, to push me into compliance through fear and nuisance tactics. She was testing my resolve, trying to gauge just how far she could push before I pushed back. But I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. "Well," I said, forcing my voice into a calm, measured tone, "if you have any real concerns, I suggest you bring them up in the next HOA meeting. I'll be more than happy to address them in front of the entire community." I watched her jaw tighten, her nostrils flaring slightly as she struggled to maintain her composure. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched down my driveway, her stiff, hurried strides a stark contrast to the slow, regal pace she had adopted the day before. I watched her go, a strange mixture of anger and satisfaction swirling in my chest. She had clearly underestimated me, assumed that I would shrink back at the first sign of conflict. But she was wrong. I had spent too many years fighting for my place in this world to let someone like Karen bully me into submission. As I turned back towards my house, I felt a strange sense of anticipation building within me, a quiet, simmering thrill at the prospect of standing my ground, of proving once and for all that I wasn't the meek, passive woman she clearly thought I was. The battle had only just begun, and Karen had no idea what she had unleashed. I thought the confrontation on my front porch would give Karen a reason to back off, but I had underestimated just how deeply she had sunk her claws into this power trip. If anything, my defiance had only stoked the fire in her, pushing her to escalate her petty campaign against me. The following week, I noticed small but telling signs that the pressure was building. It started with the letters, small, white envelopes that appeared in my mailbox every few days, each one bearing the cold, impersonal stamp of the HOA. The first few were basic reminders about lawn maintenance, property upkeep, and the importance of community standards. I tossed them aside, my irritation simmering but not yet boiling. Then came the fines. A bright, neon pink envelope landed in my mailbox one brisk Friday morning, its aggressive color clashing sharply with the earthy tones of my front porch. I tore it open, the paper crackling in my grip as I unfolded the neatly typed letter inside. Notice of violation, property maintenance penalty. The letter accused me of various minor infractions: unapproved yard decorations, improper fence placement, excessive lawn growth. The total fine? An absurd $500. I felt my jaw tighten, the muscles in my neck coiling like a spring. This wasn't just a warning. It was a direct attack, a financial slap meant to bully me into submission. But if Karen thought a few $100s would be enough to scare me into tearing down my fence, she was in for a rude awakening. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball and tossed it into the trash. I had no intention of paying a cent, and I was done playing her game. That weekend, I decided to fight back, not with angry phone calls or confrontational meetings, but by doing what I did best, working with my hands. If Karen wanted to wage a war over my yard, I would show her just how stubborn a simple woman could be. I spent the next 2 days reinforcing my fence, driving fresh steel posts deep into the ground, tightening every bolt, and securing each plank with a fresh coat of weatherproof sealant. I added a new layer of gravel to the walkway, trimmed the hedges into perfect, crisp lines, and polished the small metal sign by my front gate that read "Private Property, No Trespassing." By the time I stepped back to admire my work, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn. My fingers ached, my shoulders throbbed, but I felt an immense, quiet satisfaction. Karen could send as many pink envelopes as she wanted. This fence wasn't going anywhere, but I should have known she wouldn't stop there. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee on the front porch, I spotted a white van pulling up to the curb. It had the HOA's emblem stenciled on the side, its engine rumbling softly as 2 men in bright orange vests climbed out, their tool belts clinking with each step. I set my mug down, my pulse quickening as they made their way up my driveway, one of them clutching a clipboard, the other a long, yellow measuring tape. I rose slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs as I approached them. "Morning," I said, planting myself firmly in their path. "Can I help you?" The man with the clipboard glanced up, his eyes flicking nervously from me to the house behind me. "Ma'am, we're here on behalf of the HOA. We've been instructed to perform a property inspection." "An inspection?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "By whose authority?" The second man, the one with the measuring tape, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze as he unspooled the long, yellow line across my lawn. The first man cleared his throat, his eyes still glued to the clipboard. "We received a complaint," he muttered, flipping through his notes. "Several, actually." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. Of course, Karen. She had escalated her campaign from passive-aggressive letters to outright harassment, sending her cronies to snoop around my property, looking for any excuse to slap me with another fine. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Well," I said, my voice steady but hard, "before you take another step onto my lawn, I suggest you take a look at this." I turned on my heel, marching back to my front door and returning a moment later with the thick manila folder containing my property survey. I thrust it into the clipboard man's hands, watching his eyes widen as he flipped through the pages, his brows knitting together in confusion. "These," I said, my voice rising, "are the official property lines, verified by a licensed surveyor. My fence is well within my legal boundaries. So unless you have a court order, I suggest you and your friend pack up your tools and get off my land." The two men exchanged nervous glances, the clipboard guy's face turning a deep shade of crimson as he quickly folded the papers back into the folder and handed it back to me. Sorry for the trouble, ma'am," he stammered, backing away slowly. We'll make a note of this." I watched them retreat, their hurried footsteps crunching over the gravel path as they scrambled back to their van. The engine roared to life, the tires kicking up a spray of loose stones as they sped down the street, their taillights flashing briefly before disappearing around the corner. I took a deep, steadying breath, my hands still trembling slightly as I clutched the folder to my chest. I had won this round, but I knew Karen wasn't done yet. She had tasted blood, and she wasn't going to back down until she had either forced me into submission or driven me out of the neighborhood altogether. As I stepped back inside, the morning light casting long, defiant shadows across my freshly polished fence, I felt a dark, determined resolve harden in my chest. Karen wanted a war. Fine. She was about to get one. The days following my confrontation with the HOA inspectors passed in tense, watchful silence. I knew better than to assume Karen would back down after one failed attempt to intimidate me. If anything, I expected her to double down, and I was right. The first real sign came one crisp, chilly morning. I was trimming the hedges along the front of my house, the rhythmic snip of the clippers slicing through the quiet air, when I heard the distant rumble of an engine. I glanced up to see a sleek, black SUV rolling slowly down the street, its tinted windows reflecting the cold morning light. It paused briefly in front of my house, the driver lingering just long enough to give me a bad feeling before speeding off, tires crunching over the gravel road. I frowned, my hands tightening around the wooden handles of the clippers. Something about that SUV set my nerves on edge, but I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to the lingering tension from my recent standoff with the HOA. But my instincts had been right. That afternoon, as I returned from a quick trip to the local hardware store, I found a small, neatly folded piece of paper tucked under my front doormat. I picked it up, my brow furrowing as I unfolded the note, its edges crisp and clean as if it had just been printed. "You have been warned." I felt a cold shiver creep down my spine, the simple, typewritten words stark against the white paper. No signature, no return address, just a blunt, anonymous threat. I crumpled the note in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the street for any sign of movement. But the road was empty, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the pine trees lining my yard. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me with a sharp click, my mind racing. This was no longer just a petty HOA dispute. Someone was trying to scare me, to push me into abandoning my home, my sanctuary. But whoever had left that note clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. The next morning, I awoke to the sharp, metallic clatter of tools and the low hum of machinery. I bolted upright, heart hammering in my chest as I scrambled to the window, yanking the curtains aside to reveal a chaotic scene in my front yard. A group of construction workers, clad in bright orange vests and hard hats, were tearing up the small, gravel walkway leading to my front porch. One of them, a burly man with a thick, black beard, was manning a jackhammer, the powerful tool vibrating through the ground as chunks of gravel flew into the air. Another worker was busy pulling up the wooden fence posts I had reinforced just days earlier, tossing them into the back of a rusted flatbed truck with a careless, metallic clank. I felt my breath catch in my throat, a wave of white-hot anger surging through me as I threw on my jacket and stormed outside, the screen door banging shut behind me. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cutting through the roar of the machinery. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The workers paused, their heads swiveling in my direction as I marched down the steps, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. The man with the jackhammer killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after the chaotic noise, and turned to face me, his eyes unreadable behind the dark, mirrored lenses of his safety glasses. "We're here on HOA orders," he said, his voice gruff, the words muffled slightly by the thick, gray dust swirling around him. "Got a work order to remove this unapproved walkway and fence." "Unapproved?" I spat, the word bitter on my tongue. "This is private property, and I have the paperwork to prove it. Who gave you the right to tear up my yard?" The man shrugged, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. "Talk to the HOA," he muttered, turning back to his crew. "We're just doing our job." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides, the edges of my vision tinged with red as I fought the urge to scream. I had spent countless hours building that walkway, planting every stone by hand, arranging each slab of polished granite with care and precision. And now these strangers, these hired hands, were tearing it apart without so much as a warning. I stormed back inside, my pulse thundering in my ears as I grabbed my phone and punched in the number for the HOA office. It rang twice before a chipper, automated voice clicked on, informing me that the office was currently closed for the weekend. I cursed under my breath, slamming the phone down on the counter, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and frustration. I spent the next few hours pacing the length of my living room, the sound of the jackhammer outside driving me to the brink of madness. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the deafening roar of destruction as my hard work was ripped apart piece by piece. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows across my ruined lawn, the workers packed up their tools and drove off without a word, the flatbed truck groaning under the weight of my splintered fence posts and shattered gravel. I stood in the doorway, my breath fogging in the cold evening air as I watched their taillights disappear into the distance, a bitter, metallic taste lingering on my tongue. I knew this was Karen's doing, her latest, most aggressive attempt yet to drive me out of the neighborhood. But as I stood there, the wind whipping through my hair, my fists clenched tightly at my sides, a new, fierce determination took root in my heart. Karen wanted a fight, and I was done playing defense. If she thought she could break me with bulldozers and jackhammers, she had no idea what she was up against. I was done being the quiet, unassuming homeowner. It was time to take this battle to her doorstep. As the dust settled from the unexpected invasion of my front yard, I sat on my porch steps, staring at the chaos left behind. The gravel walkway I had so carefully laid was gone, the polished stones now nothing more than broken shards in the back of a work truck. My sturdy fence, the symbol of my quiet defiance, had been reduced to a pile of splintered wood. My once pristine lawn looked like a battlefield, deep ruts carved into the soil where the heavy machinery had rolled over it without a second thought. I clenched my fists, my jaw tight, every muscle in my body coiled like a spring. I had reached my breaking point. Karen had pushed me too far, and I was done playing by her rules. That night, I stayed up late, my fingers flying over my laptop's keyboard as I combed through pages of HOA bylaws, property rights, and legal precedents. I pulled out every document I had ever signed when I bought this house, highlighting passages, making notes, and building my case. I would not just fight this. I would destroy her paper castle of petty power and control. The next morning, I made my first move. I dialed the number of my old college friend, Lisa, who had become one of the most respected property lawyers in the state. We hadn't spoken in years, but the moment she picked up the phone, her voice warm and familiar, I felt a flicker of hope reignite in my chest. "Emily, long time no talk," she said, her tone bright and genuinely happy to hear from me. I skipped the small talk, diving straight into my story, laying out the harassment, the fines, the unauthorized destruction of my property. I could hear her tone shift, her voice growing colder, more focused, as I described the scene in my yard just a day earlier. "She tore up your walkway without a court order?" Lisa repeated, her disbelief sharp and clear over the line. "That's not just an HOA violation. That's criminal trespass and property damage. You have every right to sue her." I felt a tight knot in my chest loosen at her words, a fierce, vindicated anger bubbling up as she outlined my options. We spent the next hour strategizing, drafting letters, and compiling evidence. By the time I hung up, I felt more prepared, more determined than I had in weeks. The following day, I made my second move. I drove downtown to the local courthouse, where I filed a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA. I demanded compensation for the destruction of my walkway, the removal of my fence, and the emotional distress she had caused me through her constant harassment. I included copies of my property survey, photographs of the damage, and the ominous letter I had found on my doorstep. As I walked back to my car, the autumn air crisp and cool against my face, I felt a newfound sense of purpose, a quiet, burning resolve to see this fight through to the end. 2 days later, I received my first taste of victory. Karen's pristine, white Lexus was parked in her driveway as I pulled up to my house, a bright red sticker plastered across the windshield. Notice of legal action. The bold letters stark against the spotless glass. I felt a fierce, primal satisfaction bloom in my chest as I stepped out of my car, watching Karen scurry out of her front door, her face pale and drawn as she ripped the sticker from her windshield, her hands shaking with barely contained rage. I didn't bother hiding my smirk as I locked eyes with her across the street, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She was clearly rattled, her carefully curated image of control and superiority crumbling beneath the weight of my retaliation. Later that evening, as I sat on my freshly repaved walkway, sipping a cold glass of lemonade, I received a call from Lisa. She had just received a copy of Karen's response to my complaint, a frantic, hastily written letter filled with excuses, denials, and desperate attempts to justify her actions. It was clear she was panicking, her polished facade cracking under the pressure. "She's scared," Lisa said, her tone smug. "You've got her on the ropes, Emily. Now it's time to go for the knockout." I smiled, my fingers tightening around the cool glass in my hand. I had never considered myself a fighter, had never sought out conflict or confrontation, but Karen had forced my hand. She had poked and prodded, harassed and threatened, until she had awoken a side of me I hadn't known existed, a side that refused to back down, that thrived on the thrill of a hard-won victory. The final blow came a week later, when the HOA board, clearly eager to distance themselves from Karen's reckless behavior, voted to remove her as president. I received an official letter, delivered in a plain white envelope this time, informing me that Karen had been stripped of her title, her authority, and her power over the neighborhood she had once ruled with an iron fist. I framed that letter, hanging it proudly in my study, a small but meaningful reminder of the battle I had fought and won. As I stood on my newly restored porch that evening, the last rays of the setting sun casting a warm, golden glow across my yard, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace settle over me. My home, my sanctuary, was safe once more, and I had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was not someone to be trifled with. As I watched the shadows stretch across the neatly trimmed grass, the crisp, cool wind rustling the branches of the old oak tree, I smiled to myself, knowing that Karen's reign of terror had finally come to an end. But even as I turned to step inside, closing the door on the cool evening air, a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that this was not truly the end, that somewhere, in some quiet corner of this sprawling neighborhood, another battle was already brewing, another conflict waiting to surface. And I would be ready.